You are listening to the Bat Flip Podcast, a baseball podcast from Belly Up Sports and the Belly Up Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Damian and Matt.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Damian, here with my co-host, Matt, coming to you on June 28th of 2022. Got a shorter episode for you today. Got a big brawl that happened this week. A couple injury news. Our first trade of the hot stove season. We're going to talk about MLB talking with the A's about their potential relocation. A prospect finally gets his call after being a number one overall pick 9 years ago. And then we'll mention a bill today that the Senate has pushed against MLB. Plus players of the week. But before we get to all of that, how are you doing, Matt?
Doing pretty good. Had a pretty nice week, and excited for the holiday next weekend, and looking forward to talking a little baseball tonight.
Yeah, I cannot wait for that holiday coming up for sure. July 4th is always fun to celebrate. And then my birthday is just shortly after on that Friday, so it's gonna be a good week right there for sure. Gonna probably take a 3-day work week there and have 2 3-day weekends bookending it, so that'll be nice. But let's go ahead and we'll jump right into we'll start with the brawl that happened between the Angels and Mariners on Sunday. There was a hit by a pitch in Saturday's game. I forget who actually got hit from the Angels.
I was gonna say it was Jesse Winker, but you said that from the Angels, yeah. I don't know.
It was the day before. There was a hit by pitch that the Mariners hit one of the Angels players. I forget exactly who it was, and then on Sunday they had announced their starter was going to be Jose Suarez. I think they said it was 30 minutes or 40 minutes before the game, they switched to a bullpen guy, saying that the starter was, going to be scratched today for soreness or something like that. He hits Julio Rodriguez or throws behind Julio Rodriguez in the first and then hits Jesse Winker in the second. And I don't know who said something from the Angels dugout, but it caused this massive brawl that broke out. Anthony Rendon's out there with a cast punching Jesse Winker in the face. I mean, coaches are throwing stuff. Raisel Iglesias grabs sunflower seeds and chucks them across the field. It was just a massive, massive brawl. Ended up that 12 players actually got suspended in the incident, and even some other front office type player personnel people from both teams as well got suspended.
Yeah, so to go back, I just looked up the first catalyst for that was Eric Swanson threw a 95-mile-per-hour fastball that ran up and in on Trout.
There you go.
Near his head. So obviously don't throw at Mike Trout or you're going to get in trouble. But yeah, I mean, this was just a wild brawl. One of the wilder ones we've seen in a while. Both teams were obviously furious. Obviously you hate seeing that, but at the same time, it's kind of good to see because, I think some of that type of, those rivalries and stuff, that's really good for baseball. Obviously having a full-on brawl like that's probably not great for baseball, but obviously I think it's bad for the game if that's based off of a like a bat flip or something. But protecting your players, protecting your superstar. I don't want to see people get intentionally hit, but I think sometimes the rivalries and stuff can be good. And man, that's a long list of suspensions we got.
Yeah, so it starts with manager Phil Nevin of the Angels getting 10 games. Jesse Winker got 7 games. J.P. Crawford, Anthony Rendon, and Dom, it's going to sound weird, Chitty, got 5 games. Yeah. Andrew Waints, who was the bullpen arm that started the game, and Ryan Tepera got 3 games. Julio Rodriguez, Raisel Iglesias, Ray Montgomery, and Manny Del Campo got 2 games. And then Bill Hasselman got 1 game. A couple things with this. I mentioned the starter got scratched. As soon as Wance was thrown out of the game, the original starter came in the game that got scratched for soreness. He came in and pitched after, so that wasn't more of a sign. But with Rendon being on the IL, it is interesting that he'll have to serve those games next year when he's able to come off the IL. But MLB did actually still suspend him from being on the bench for 5 games, regardless of the 5-game suspension he's going to have to serve next year whenever he's ready to actually come off the IL.
Yeah, that's kind of weird. I don't especially understand that. I mean, if you're going to suspend him, for fully for 5 games now, or whenever he's healthy. I don't understand suspending him for 5 not you can't be in the ballpark games, and then 5 you're actually suspended games. That's kind of weird, but yeah, I mean that's a big deal. I mean losing Julio Rodriguez for a couple games is big. Obviously the Angels now are going to have to scramble for a backup to the backup manager, since Phil Nevin's already an interim, and now they're going to have to go find another guy to manage them for 10 games, which is a pretty extended period of time. So that'll be interesting to see. And yeah, I mean, that was just wild stuff. I mean, Rendon coming out with a castone is,
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty crazy. And then, I don't know. I mean, I get why they're coming down hard on Phil Nevin, because it was quite obvious that he was the one who orchestrated, coming out there and doing that, since with the way he managed the pitchers and, scratching the starter and stuff for that. So definitely, you know, that's not something you typically see from a manager. Usually it's, they're going to throw their guy, and if he throws at him, he throws at him and gets thrown out of the game, and then you end up with a bullpen game at that point. It's not usually we're going to throw a guy for an inning just so he can hit somebody and then bring in our starter. Like that's unusual. So, but definitely, definitely interesting. And those teams play a lot of games against each other. So I don't know if it's over now, or I'm sure the next couple games will be under the microscope, but I don't know if it's over or not. That's a pretty big rivalry. Those teams play a lot of games coming up. So we'll see if anything else transpires from that.
Yeah, and then you mentioned with Phil Nevin, it's going to be a big loss for the Angels, but Jesse Winker for 7 games for the Mariners, who has been really hot. I mean, this past week, Winker was hitting 429 with a 586 on base percentage and 810 slugging. A couple homers. He was starting to look like Jesse Winker of old, and then JP Crawford for 5 games as well. I mean, that's another guy who's had a really good season for them so far, and they're still trying to battle, trying to get back up to wild card contention after they've kind of fell out of it. But those are going to be big losses for them. Another big loss for them is going to be Ty France. He ended up having a collision at first base the other day, and ended up getting a grade 2 flexor strain in his left arm, which is his catching arm. They aren't quite sure the timeline. He's pushing to come back as soon as he's eligible, but you never know with those flexor strains and how that's going to go long term. And while that happened, they ended up trading for first baseman Carlos Santana from the Royals for 2 prospects named Wyatt Mills and William Fleming.
Yeah, so starting off Ty France, that's a big time bummer to lose him. He was absolutely killing it. Already put up 2.3 WAR on the season, 156 WRC plus. You're not going to replace that, but from the point of view of the Mariners, going out and getting Carlos Santana, it makes sense. I was actually intrigued the other day. Apparently, Carlos Santana caught the other day, which is kind of crazy. We haven't seen that. He did catch the other day. They had, I think, Melendez was DHing and Perez was out because of the injury. So they had Carlos Santana caught. He didn't catch the whole game, I don't think, but he caught some. And that was interesting because that's been a long time, I think, since he's caught. But, yeah. So maybe Carlos Santana, you're getting a guy who he's an okay bat. He's about a league average-ish bat. He's got a really low batting average on balls in play, but he's not going to run a very high batting average on balls in play. So his line on the season, 216, 349 on base, 341 slugging. Obviously you'd like to see him slug a little bit better, but he's a guy that's going to get on base at a pretty good clip. He always has, and a 17% walk rate is really nice to see. And I mean, he can kind of play first base still. He's not gonna catch.
Just looking, I don't even. Fangraphs doesn't even have him catching an inning so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, he was listed as on the box score as having caught. I don't know if he actually caught, but he was listed. I was looking through the box scores, and he was listed as a catcher in that game. So maybe they listed him there and something happened, or I don't know. It might have been wrong, but it was in the box score the other day that I was looking at. But anyways, yeah, Carlos Santana.
No, I see what you're looking at. It was Melendez was DHing. He went to catcher, but that's because Gallagher was catching. But Santana, they list him as C Santana, so it looks like it was. It looks like it was catcher first base, but it was just his name.
Gotcha. Well, my bad then. But he didn't catch then. But he used to be a catcher. But yeah, going forward, losing him is a big deal. Or getting him pretty helpful to the Mariners. While France is out. And then for the Royals, it makes a lot of sense because Vinny Pasquantino is a guy who in the minor leagues has hit and hit and hit some more. He is a horrible defensive player, horrible speed wise, but I mean he can flat out hit, and apparently he's above average defensively. Um, so you look at him in the minor leagues this year, had a 280 average, 372 on base, and a 576 slugging. Really nice stats there. 18 home runs in only 69 games. Nice. I think he's going to be a really solid big leaguer. Those numbers should translate pretty well to the big leagues. Like I say, that 20 grade speed he's got, it's going to limit him to only first base. But, that hit tool is great. And then the fact that he does have some decent power is going to help as well. So, we'll see what happens with with him at the big league level, and then the two players that came back from the trade, were a couple of one of them was a reliever who had been a fairly good rated prospect for Seattle, but had struggled at the big league level, and also you look at a guy in the other one, I think Fleming.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of a back end of the top 30 type prospect that, is probably a future reliever. So you get a couple guys with, you might end up getting to pitch in the big leagues for, Carlos Santana, who has no future in Kansas City other than just he was blocking Pasquantino. So definitely a good trade for Kansas City.
Yeah, and they still even have Nick Prado
Yeah.
as another first base prospect that could come up as well. Maybe not right now, but in the future. Mills, he was pretty decent in the majors this year. 4.15 ERA, but a 3.48 FIP. The expected FIP was still high at a 5, but I mean, he's been pretty decent. I mean, for a Royals team, he'll be just fine. I mean, for a team that's kind of rebuilding and setting themselves up for the future, like you said, Fleming's going to be a back end either depth starter or just a long reliever, kind of out of the bullpen type guy. But
Yeah.
Santana didn't have a future there, and you get to bring one of your top prospects up in the Royal system and see what you got. And the Mariners get a guy who can fill in for France for now and then be a solid bench bat for you late. I mean, in June, he was crushing so far.
Yeah.
I don't have his stats right in front of me, but I think it was like 357 so far in June he was batting. So, you get a guy while he's hot, and maybe he helps make up for some of that lack of offense you have right now.
Yep.
But so we'll jump on to our next one, which is another bit of injury news, and that's with Bryce Harper. He ended up getting hit with a 97-mile-an-hour fastball on the thumb, ended up causing a thumb fracture. He's actually going to undergo surgery tomorrow, and they're looking at about a 6 to 8 week timeline until he's able to get back to baseball activities.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bummer for Bryce Harper. He was having a great year, was knocking the cover off the ball. He had already dealt with the elbow injury, pushing him to DH only duties. And, even then he was still very valuable for the Phillies, even not being able to play defense. And, it's a bummer for him and the Phillies because they couldn't afford to lose this bat, especially they had been really hot this month. And losing him is a really, really, really big hurt for the Phillies because, that takes their best bat out of their lineup. And, that's not a team that can afford, a lot of room for error right now with, being behind the Braves and Mets already, being on the very edge of playoff contention. And the fact that, I mean, their playoff odds were already, their playoff odds are in the low 30s right now. And, with a long period of no Bryce Harper, that is not probably gonna do too well. So, maybe he'll come back soon, hopefully, 6 to 8 weeks. So you're looking at what, the end of August?
Yeah.
If they're still in it,
August.
Yeah, I mean, if they're still in it, then at the end of August, and he comes back. I mean, you would assume 6 to 8 weeks, and he'd have to have at least 3 or 4 games of rehab too.
Yeah.
And that's just like you said, that's just baseball activities. So,
Mm-hmm.
looking at the end of August, I mean, you would hope that he would be able to come back and play around them, but I don't know if the Phillies are going to still be in the race. I mean, they're already like what 10, 8, 9 games behind the Mets. So,
Something like that.
and obviously the division was going to be tough regardless. But the wild card, they're 3 or 4 games out of the wild card right now, and I don't think that the Braves are going to fall apart, and I don't think that the Giants are going to fall apart, who are around the Phillies. And I mean, one of those. I mean, I think the Cardinals and Brewers are both going to stay with pretty good records, and obviously the Padres and Dodgers are going to have great records. So, that extra wild card, even with that extra wild card, it's going to be tough for the Phillies to make the postseason without Bryce Harper.
Yeah, and I wonder that if they are out, when he's around the timeline of coming back, if it wouldn't even make sense to shut him down and maybe even say, hey, go get the UCL surgery right now. And maybe you miss the first month of the season or so, because usually with a position player, it's 6 to 7 months you can get back to, start throwing at least. But I mean, as an outfielder, that'll obviously be a little bit longer. But
Yeah.
I would think if you're out of it at that point, you're going to have to, just say get that dealt with, because it's going to be an issue long term. I mean, we've seen Max Muncy still struggle with it this year, and he tried to rehab through the offseason, and that's not even his throwing arm; it's his non-throwing arm.
Yeah. He might. I mean, Bryce Harper might. I mean, I would go ahead and do it now. I mean, he'd be back for the beginning of the year if he did it now, most likely, or close to the beginning of the year. So
yeah, I mean, I guess erring on the side of caution, like if Dombrowski is able to make some moves at the deadline and make them a contender, and they're contending for a wild card spot in the end of September, you get a guy like Bryce Harper back, like that's a big boost to it. So I could understand from that scenario, but like if you get to the middle of the beginning to middle of August and it's not looking good, like you guys are already there, like I think at that point you decide to do it. From that point. But either way, he's going to be out for the foreseeable future, and it sucks for a guy like Bryce Harper who's having such a great year. And, already battling the elbow injury, and then now the thumb fracture. But we'll go jump over to our next kind of injury / IL situation, and that was with Kenley Jansen. Actually, today had to go on the IL with an irregular heartbeat. He's dealt with this before. Back in 2012, he had an issue, shut him down for a while. He ended up having surgery. I believe it was in the off season to help with that. He dealt with it once again in 2018. He was shut down for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then in the off season ended up having to have another surgery to help fix that issue again. So it doesn't sound like it's been a serious enough issue. It sounds like a 2018 where he could be only off for a couple weeks or so, but hopefully it does not turn into a big issue for Kenley Jansen, because the Braves are going to need a guy like that at the back end of their bullpen.
Yeah, Kenley Jansen's looked really, really good this year so far, and it's actually been one of his better years since 2017 when he put up that insane year with the Dodgers. But it's a bummer to see him have this issue pop back up again. The good news is that this is something he's dealt with before, and he's seemed to, when he's dealt with it just be able to rest him a couple weeks, and then he's back to being able to be fully ready to go again. They have pitched him on back-to-backs a couple times recently. I don't know if overworking him maybe a little bit, might have affected it a little bit, because I mean, he pitched back-to-back days, Saturday and Sunday, this weekend, and then the issue pops up, or the issues put on the IL today. So I'm sure it came up after last night's start, or attempt to close, and I think the Braves injuries are piling up. I mean, especially in that bullpen. Jansen's out, Matzek's been out for a while. He's starting to rehab, but you also got Ozzy Albies and Eddie Rosario out in that lineup. Ronald Acuna Jr.'s not playing tonight. He didn't play yesterday. He's not going on the IL, but he's got a bruised foot. He's missing a few games. Kirby Yates is still not back yet. So the Braves do have some injury issues right now, and they're hoping to get some of these guys back, in the next few weeks, and that'll be very helpful to the program for the Braves. But yeah, I mean, Kenley Jansen being out, that's a big deal. So.
Yeah, at least they do still have a guy like Will Smith that does have some closing experience that can jump right in there.
Yeah, I think I was gonna say, I think Mentor's going to be closing for him because Will Smith struggled some this year. And in fact, that the game right now is in the ninth inning. They just brought Mentor in the same situation. So,
Well, there
um,
it is.
yeah. So, but Mentor's been insanely good this year. So hopefully he can continue that. But
Yeah, he has been. So let's jump over and we're going to talk a little bit of a guy who got drafted back in 2013 as the number one overall pick in the draft. Was supposed to have a bright future, really struggled in the minors. I think even at one time retired for a little bit, came back, is now a reliever with the Phillies, and finally at the age of 30, now got his first call up to the major leagues with the Phillies. That is Mark Appel.
yeah, this is a pretty good story. You've got you know, he's a guy that first overall pick, all these expectations on him out of Stanford. Um, a right-handed pitcher. Came up with Houston, and he never really got going in his career. His first couple minor league seasons, he did okay at times. Moving him up, they moved him up a couple times. He struggled, but then he adjusted. 2014, looked pretty good in 39 innings at at Double A. But after that, I mean, he just never really got a foothold. 4.26 ERA 2015. He got traded to Philly. I don't remember what trade that was. It might have been. Trying to remember what trade Houston made with Philly that year, um,
I'll look it
but
up.
yeah, but it was it might have been Ken Giles actually.
I
Um,
think that is right.
Yeah, I think it was the Ken Giles trade. I remember him getting moved because it was a fairly high profile trade, but he just never really took off, and then he didn't pitch in the minors between 2017 and 2021. So, that was the time you're talking about. He was out of baseball for part of that time. I think obviously he also had the COVID year in 2020. He didn't pitch regardless of whether he wanted to or not. And then he hadn't been last year. He was really, really bad in the minors, Double A and Triple A as a starter. This year, he's been a full time reliever. He's been a little bit better. So, they figured, why not give him a shot? He had a 161 ERA at Triple A. His peripherals weren't that good, but they were improved over all of his peripherals in his previous several seasons. So they thought they ought to give him a shot. And he still hasn't pitched yet in the big leagues, but he's on the team, so hopefully we get to see him make his long-awaited debut soon. But I did look up before our show tonight. There's some interesting things about him. When he was picked in 2013, first overall, some of the players he's picked in front of who were first rounders. There was a lot of guys obviously picked in every draft that ended up being surprises, but other first rounders, Chris Bryant was the number 2 pick. John Gray was picked to number 3. Um, you've got Austin Meadows picked in the top 10. Dominic Smith picked number 11. Hunter Renfroe was picked up high. J.P. Crawford, Tim Anderson were picked in the first round. The list goes on. Aaron Judge was the 32nd pick. And then there's obviously tons of other guys who were picked later in that draft. But I thought it was really interesting the guys that he was picked ahead of, and didn't make it. So especially as a college guy that gets picked number 1 too. But it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, it's really nice to see Appel that has stuck with it. Finally, get that call, like you said. Hopefully, we get to see him actually get into a game because I think it was called up Saturday, and
Yeah.
he hasn't been in a game yet, and it doesn't look like he's going to be in tonight's game. But another interesting thing I found is that I didn't even realize it until looking just a little bit ago that the week that Appel was traded was also the same week that Dansby Swanson was traded, making it the first time that 2 number 1 overall picks had been traded in the same week. Was that offseason
Yeah.
where they got the Shelby Miller for Dansby Swanson trade, which I thought that
Yeah.
was pretty interesting as well.
Yeah, that is interesting. I didn't even realize that. And, one other little note here on the on that pick, the Astros don't miss very often in the first round, and that was one that they missed. Their other first round picks around that time, in 2010 was Mike Fultonevich, who was a big league All Star. 2011 was George Springer. 2012 was Carlos Correa. 2013, obviously, Mark Appel. 2014 was Brady Aiken, but they did not sign him. So they had 2 top 5 picks in 2015, with which they took Kyle Tucker and Alex Bregman. So around that time, the first round picks they had were Tucker, Bregman, Correa, Springer, and Fultonevich, 4 of which were part of their World Series core, and then the other one of which was, ended up being an all-star after a trade to a different team. So, Mark Appel was really the only miss that they had in that time frame. And, their 2016 first rounder was Forrest Whitley, who has been a top prospect, but has dealt with major injury issues. So definitely thought that was kind of interesting to look at, too.
So just don't let the Astros draft first round pitchers, and they should be fine.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what it sounds like. But no, it is good to see Appel, and hopefully he gets that call up. And the all those drafts around, you just never know with these prospects sometimes in baseball.
Yep.
Like they are so hit and miss. Even with the guy who is a surefire number 1 overall pick, you just never know.
Absolutely.
But let's jump over to our next thing with the MLB. I don't know if they meant to leak it out or it got leaked out somehow. The Oakland A's have been battling for a new stadium deal with, I think it's Hudson County or something, some county up there with Oakland, San Francisco area, about getting a new stadium. They've had multiple proposals declined, and there's going to actually be a vote on Thursday this week about their latest proposal. And Oakland, or the A's at least, has already been talking to MLB and looking at potential relocation rumors. And MLB basically has told the A's that, hey, there's usually a relocation fee, and it's going to be close to $1 billion now. If Oakland denies your latest proposal, we will waive that $1 billion relocation fee if you move to Las Vegas. So basically, MLB is setting up that they want to get a team to Las Vegas, and this is the easiest way is getting the A's to move there with no relocation fee. That's big for the A's, who are a penny-pinching franchise anyways. Not having to pay some high-dollar relocation fee will be massive for them. But it also sets up the move, like we pretty much know that Las Vegas is going to get a team, either if it's the A's relocating or in the next few years when we're looking at a potential two-team expansion through MLB. It's almost a surefire doubt that one of those will be in Las Vegas.
Yeah, so a few things that are interesting here. The A's, I, I want them to stay in Oakland just because they're the Oakland A's and they've been there for 50 years, 60 years. But at the same time, I mean, Oakland's market's just not that big anymore, especially with the Giants taking such a share of the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think that. I don't think Oakland does a very good job supporting any franchises. I mean, they lost the Raiders. Their attendance is horrible. I know that part of that also is the team being bad and the stadium's bad and whatever, but, I just don't know. I mean, it's not like they're supporting their other teams very well. I mean, you saw the Warriors move recently out of Oakland, and, I mean, it just seems like they're just not great support for teams. And they need to add, they need to support their franchise better. Whether it's, obviously the ownership does too, but that's definitely something that needs to happen if they stay in Oakland. But Las Vegas would be a great market for a new team. It's kind of a natural move from Oakland to Las Vegas. The Raiders just did it. Las Vegas doesn't have a team. One thing that I found really interesting about Las Vegas is that, obviously there's the minor league team there right now. I think their name's the Aviators now, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But they actually, Las Vegas is at 2,000 feet of elevation, which is interesting. It's not Coors Field, 5,000 feet, but it's also a pretty good bit higher. I think Phoenix is the second highest elevation in the big leagues. And I believe it is at, I think it's at about 600 feet maybe. So, I thought that was really interesting that, you might end up seeing a miniature Coors effect in Las Vegas with the elevation. And obviously they'd have to build some kind of retractable roof stadium too because of the heat. And during the summertime in Las Vegas being, in the desert, it gets over 100 degrees regularly. So definitely interesting thing to look at. Phoenix is actually at 1,000 feet. So by the way, I see that now. But yeah, definitely something interesting to look at there. And then, obviously Major League Baseball would like to expand, even if the A's stay in Oakland. I think they would probably. I think 32 teams would be a pretty natural expansion. You could even take the new 12 team playoffs and go to a similar format to what the NFL has had over the past with their 32 teams before this year. So, that would be an interesting thing too. I don't know what our second site would be. I mean, there's obviously been a lot of talk about Montreal. There's been talk about Nashville at times. There's been talk in the past about Portland. So I think that would be an interesting thing to look at too. Maybe we can discuss that at some point in the future, potential expansion spots. But yeah, I mean this is an interesting move, and the A's. I think either way it'd be good for baseball. It'd be good if the A's get a new stadium and get better support in Oakland, or if they go to Las Vegas, it's tapping into a new market that's been untapped. And I think that Las Vegas has supported their new sports franchises extremely well. So.
Yeah, Las Vegas absolutely makes sense either way, if it's for the A's or for a potential expansion. I don't want Oakland to leave either. Like it's just been the Oakland A's forever. Like that's how it should be. They just need to realize like, hey, we should support them better. Like you were mentioning, you already saw the Raiders move and the success they've already had there. Like why would you want your other team to go do the exact same thing? Like it doesn't make sense there. As far as the second place, I think it's either Montreal or Nashville for me, at least. I just think those are the two that make the most sense. But we can talk about that in a later episode when expansion gets a lot closer. But it is interesting. It seems like MLB is really pushing for that, and I don't think it's a coincidence that they put that out on the same week and just a couple days before this very crucial vote is supposed to happen. It's very convenient timing, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's good for the A's because you either get a new stadium or you get to go to a place that'll build you a new stadium there and in a better market. So
exactly. So let's jump over to our last piece of news, and we're just going to briefly touch on it. We'll talk a lot more about it as it expands because it's a very interesting story. But today, the Senate, at least 4 people on the Senate, I believe, where's it at? I have it right here. 4 senators, Dick Durbin, Chuck Grassley, Senators Richard Bluthmel and Mike Lee signed a letter today targeting MLB's antitrust exemption. Man, can I speak? And basically, the letter is seeking information and kind of targeting the international work stoppages that we've had the past couple of years, the minor league contraction and lack of pay for minor league players, the shady dynamics around the international free agent market. We've heard about a lot of the corruption and people wanting the international draft, which we've talked about here throughout the CBA negotiations. But they've had this exemption for over 100 years. I think it was just last month, the 100-year anniversary came up of them getting this antitrust, exemption. Part of that had kind of went away in 1998 with the Curt Floyd Act, but it's a very developing story here. We're not quite sure what it's actually going to lead all into, and it's going to develop as time goes on, and we'll figure out more about it. But it is pretty interesting. There's been a lot of rumors about the work stoppages, how MLB was manipulating that through the players were saying that. We've seen the minor leagues make a big push the last couple of years through the CBA for getting livable wages and housing. And then we've heard a lot about the corruption throughout the international system. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see where this, bill and letter kind of takes the future of the MLB.
Yeah, I definitely think it's interesting. I get real frustrated when Congress gets involved in sports because I don't think it's, any of their business what's going on in sports most of the time. But I think sometimes they push things to where they push things to a point to where it harms the sport. Kind of like, with college sports with the NIL stuff. I think that that's something that needed to eventually happen, but the way they pushed it made it completely undoable for long term, and it just makes it really really tough. But I think that obviously if you look at at this is probably not a good situation for MLB. I'm sure that eventually some compromise will come to whether MLB will give in to some level to whatever Congress wants them to do. But I think at the end of the day, I mean, I think it's good that some light's being shined on the issues with the minor leagues because, a lot of the issues, it makes it really difficult. And I don't understand from a team standpoint. I mean, it would help your team and your franchise an awful lot if players wanted to be there in the minor leagues because they're getting paid well and they're happy, and also the fact that it makes it really difficult for players to succeed and to improve, to be underpaid and just in poor conditions in the minor leagues. I mean, stuff like nutrition and and health in general. I mean, you have players getting with really, really poor nutrition at times in the minor leagues. And, that does not help you as a franchise to have your players get out of shape. I mean, it's just not good, that kind of thing. And I think that, maybe something good will come out of this, but definitely something to monitor going forward. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So just another thing, a little thing that came upon this weekend is kind of, it was started with the whole Wes Johnson thing, which we didn't even mention. The Minnesota Twins pitching coach has accepted a job offer from LSU in the middle of the season and is leaving the team, I believe, on Friday. I want to say he's staying with the team through this series against the Guardians, but then he's leaving to start recruiting at LSU. But through watching a bunch of different stuff about that and how the whole situation happened, NIL has changed that. And people were making the argument that, like, hey, even a player from high school that gets drafted right now, even say you're not like the first round pick and you're not getting the high signing bonus or whatever, why wouldn't you go to college through NIL now if you're getting $100,000? Go get, say, 75,000 through NIL. Go be in a D1 school with D1 facilities, great fields. You're going to have everything around you that you need, and it's going to be probably a lot better conditions than the minor leagues are in, and you're getting paid just slightly less there. Like, I think that is a big issue, and I think now with NIL, you could see a lot more players opting to either go back to school or, from high school foregoing their, the draft and whoever team signed them to just go to college. We've seen NIL explode in college football, so I would be interested to see how it starts affecting the, MLB level draft now, or minor league level draft, whatever you want to say. And how that actually starts affecting things moving forward. Will prospects just decide to go back until you get a bigger signing bonus or whatever?
Yeah, that's 100%, 100% true. I think it's going to affect the ability to pull college players out of, or pull high school players in the draft. That's already something that's been picking up, has been guys going to college because, college baseball is getting bigger. So every year.
Yeah.
And, and it's a lot of fun to watch. And there's a lot more eyes on the College World Series than on the low A championships. I mean,
absolutely, there is.
So it's a lot more fun, and you get that experience, and you're not getting paid quite as much. But if you make that choice, I mean, even as a first rounder, back into the first rounder type guy. I mean, obviously, if you're like this year's class, like Tamara Johnson, Jackson Holiday, all these guys,
right,
they're going to go pro because they're going to get multi-millions coming out of high school. But if you're in that second round ish category, and you're looking at a choice of either 800,000 or go to college, I mean, a lot of those players end up getting picked in the first round in 3 years and making that $2-3 million. So, that's a lot of times it's a good investment to start with money wise. Plus the fact that you're in college and having fun and, able to do that, have that experience. Plus, possibly advance your, make it a good monetary investment doing that. And now even with NIL on top of that, all that, that I think it's a big deal, and it's going to help, that's going to help college baseball, and it hurts Major League Baseball. But maybe Major League Baseball probably will have a way to counteract that, and hopefully it's a way that competition drives up the ability to pay minor leaguers better and to give them better conditions. So
yeah, I don't even think it hurts major leaguers, like major league teams. Like, I just think it hurts the minor leagues too. Like, the major league teams make well enough money. They're going to have players in the system all the time that they're going to be able to pull up anyways. It's just going to hurt the overall prospect depth that you're able to recoup each year through the draft.
Right.
but it is pretty interesting, and I'm going to be excited to see what it looks like moving forward because we've seen that shift kind of start happening. But I think now it's going to take even another step forward as NIL has grown bigger as we've seen over the last year or two. But anyways, that'll wrap up the main portion of the show. So now we'll jump over to players of the week to wrap it up. So who do you have for your hitter this week?
So my hitter this week actually had one of his games was one of the bigger games of the year, but it's Isaac Paredes. He had a 3-homer game, but he actually he's been fantastic this week. He's only played in 4 games for the Rays, but in those 4 games he's hit 667 with a 706 on base, a 1800 slugging percentage, and he's hit 5 home runs in 17 plate appearances. So obviously Isaac Paredes has been on fire. He had a couple walk-off hits. I mean, he's just been absolutely insane this week. And this is a guy that he's got a pretty interesting career so far. He started off with the Cubs, and he actually got traded in the Justin Wilson trade, which is a horrible trade for the Cubs right now. They traded him and Jamar Candelario, who's been a pretty solid player throughout his career so far for Detroit, even though he's not having a great year this year. They traded those two for Justin Wilson, who was a mediocre reliever, and Alex Avila, who was there for half a season as a backup catcher behind Wilson Contreras. So, that was a horrible trade for the Cubs. And, now Paredes got traded for Austin Meadows, which looks like a good trade for the Rays. Don't trade with the Rays. But he's a guy who's put up a lot of really good numbers in the minor leagues. A great plate discipline guy, high walk rate, not a high strikeout rate. He needs a little bit better more of a defensive home, it seems like. But defensively this year, by outs above average, he's actually been pretty good. So if he plays defense at the level he's playing right now, and he hits well, he's got a 164 WRC plus with a 203 batting average on balls in play. So if that batting average on balls in play comes up a little bit, which I'm sure it'll come up over 203, he could be a really nice player for the Rays. So good to see him having really his breakout week this week.
Yeah, it was pretty fun watching Paredes. I saw some of that 3-homer game, and then I believe I was watching. It was the next day I was watching the game. I think it was one of the early ones, and I had it on, and I think he was batting second or third or whatever, and came up and homered in that at bat too. And they had said like that is basically 4 homers and like 5 at bats because I think he technically had a walk in there as well. So it was whatever. He had like 4 homers and like 5 at bats though, so it was pretty interesting. And he's just been tearing the cover off the ball all the way around. Not a guy that was a high level prospect, but that's come up with the Rays. You mentioned don't trade with the Rays. They just find a way to make guys like this, be good. It's their MO for all of eternity of how they, take players to the next level. You trade a guy like Austin Meadows, who wasn't quite doing what you wanted to, had a good couple years with you, but you trade him away, get a guy come in, and then now he's kind of reached that next level as well. So it'll be interesting to see how he looks going forward because he had some fun at bats this week for sure.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
But for my hitter this week, I ended up going with a guy who's a little lower down the list of impact, but overall the week he had and the way he's kind of turned around his season so far, and that's Adley Rutschman. On the week, a 348 average, 375 on base, and 826 slugging, still a 235 WRC plus on the week. But a guy who, we mentioned he was still playing great defense, just wasn't quite hitting. He hit a couple homers this week. I think he even hit one last night. He's hit some big doubles. I believe he had a go-ahead RBI double against the White Sox over the weekend. So a guy who's really starting to reach that next level offensively than he was, and kind of starting to fulfill that prospect status that we all kind of put on him. And I think through 30 games this year, he's at 0.9 WAR, so almost a full WAR already through 30 games for a guy who's batting 234 with a 298 on base so far this season.
Yeah, that's some really impressive stuff for him. He's starting to really figure it out and hit well. He had some bad luck on his batted balls early on, but he was striking out a little bit more than you would think Adley would strike out. But he's going to be a fantastic player, and he's already the Orioles are playing pretty well right now. I mean, he's playing well. Some of their pitchers have actually pitched pretty well this year so far. They've got some pieces in that lineup like Santander, Mancini. Austin Hayes is having a breakout year. Mountcastle's pretty
Mountcastle.
decent. Like they've got some interesting players there. And that's not to mention the Cedric Mullins, who's really struggled for a lot of the year. So, there's some interest there. Their record at 35-40. They're not going to make the playoffs this year, but that's respectable in that division for the position that the Orioles are in. And they've still got reinforcements coming. I mean, Gunnar Henderson just got called up to AAA a few weeks ago, and he's looked incredible. Obviously Grayson Rodriguez, who's on the shelf right now with an injury, should come back late in the season, I believe. But he has a chance to be the best pitcher in baseball, in my opinion. He looks great in the minor. He's looked great in the minor leagues. So hopefully he's able to be healthy. But he looks fantastic. So
Yeah, and they've got I believe Kobe Mayo
yeah,
and Colton Cowser were just called up to
yep,
Double A as well,
yep,
and Heston Kierstad
yeah.
is playing his first
Finally
baseball in 2
playing again.
years.
Yeah,
So I mean, things are starting to look up for that Orioles farm system.
yeah,
And you've seen a couple of guys come up and reach that level for them so far, but they have a bright future. They really do if they can just find a couple more pitchers, long term. Because I think you see a lot of parts of their future lineup already either in the big leagues or starting to make their impacts in the minor leagues.
yeah, for sure.
So who do you have? We'll move over to the pitchers now. So who do you have your pitcher this week?
So I picked Dylan Cease for my pitcher this week. He had 2 starts this week, 13 innings, a 16.6 strikeout per 9, just 2 walks per 9. Great week for Dylan Cease. He's a guy that's been struggling a little bit. As of late, he's had some walk issues this year. Up over 4 walks per 9. Strikeout rate's fantastic, but the season numbers in general are really good. A 2.56 ERA, 2.51 FIP. That efficiency has held him back a little bit. Only 81 innings and 15 starts, but Dylan Cease is really good. His start, I believe he had a start where a couple days ago where he just had an absolute insanely good game, but only gave up 1 run in those 13 innings. He's doing really well right now, and I think one of us might have picked him as Cy Young, or we had him as breakout at the start of the year for
We had him a
sure.
guy
But
to watch for Cy Young.
we had him as a guy to watch. We didn't pick him for it, but we had him as a guy to watch. So his start against the Orioles, 13 strikeouts, 1 walk, 1 run on on a home run by Jonathan Aruz. So that was the start that he made the other day. But yeah, I mean Dylan Cease is really good, and I think he's gonna continue to get better. There's still room for improvement there with the walks that he's put up this year.
Yeah, and you mentioned he had 2 starts this week, and you mentioned a 7-inning start against Baltimore, 13 strikeouts. But I even think his other start is probably more impressive. That's a 6 innings against Toronto, 1 hit,
Yeah, Toronto,
the 2 walks, and 11 strikeouts.
Yeah.
So one,
but 2 really good
one
ones.
one less inning, 3 less hits, or
Yeah.
he gave it 3 less hits in that 1 inning, but two less strikeouts. I mean, I still think that start is just against that Toronto lineup compared to, the overall lineup the Orioles are throwing out there right now. That's a more impressive start to me. But Dylan,
Yeah, of course, I was watching the game where they were facing, or I was keeping up with the game they were facing the Orioles. I wasn't really keeping up with the game against Toronto, so that is impressive. Both of them were great, his overall numbers, but
they were, and his overall numbers on the season you mentioned good. They're so good so far. I mean, we did have him as a breakout candidate to watch. I think we both wanted to pick him for Cy Young. We just didn't pull the trigger on it. But he's starting to take that level that we thought most people thought he could get to. And that trade is looking a lot worse now, even for Jose Quintana. Now, if Cease is taking that next level, because Eloy hasn't, really fulfilled that yet. But, Cease is really good, and I wouldn't be surprised if he starts taking that. He's the upper echelon, top 10 starting pitcher moving forward in the game. I think that's how good he could be. But for my starter this week, I actually went with Chad Kuhl, and a lot of it is because he threw a shutout yesterday against the Dodgers in Coors Field. I was watching a lot of that game. I think I turned it off in like the 8th inning or something, and went to sleep. But he had started to struggle over the last month or so. Even against Miami in the second start this week, in 5 innings, he gave up 4 runs. But to be able to do what he did against the lineup who, they had started to hit a lot better. They went into Cincinnati, and it is against the Reds, but they scored like 29 runs in 3 games. They went to Atlanta, had some really tough games against them, but were able to get the offense going, when it needed. And to do that in Coors Field, whereas, a bandbox, everyone knows about what the Coors Field effect is. To throw a shutout, only 5 strikeouts, only give up 3 hits in general, no walks. It was just a really good start from Chad Kuhl, a guy who's had a really good season so far, 3.49 ERA, 3.96 FIP. The xFIP is kind of high at 4.58, but, for a cast-off from the Pirates, for a team that, was looking for some starting pitching to go to the Rockies and have that start to the season so far in a place like Colorado has been, it's been really phenomenal to see. And then for him to do that against a lineup that I think most people would consider the best lineup or one of the best lineups in baseball, that's saying something.
Yeah, I mean, Chad Kuhl's been pretty solid for them, and I don't think he's going to keep this up, but he's been a good, pretty nice surprise for the Rockies. So they've been their starting pitching's actually been, their pitching in general has actually been pretty decent this year.
Yeah.
It hadn't been their problem. They're top 10 in WAR for pitchers. Obviously their ERA is kind of high, but that's Coors. I mean, if you look at their FIP, 4.14. I mean that they've been pretty good on the mound.
Well,
so
and just imagine what they'd be if Herman Marquez hasn't been like actually awful this year and have his fastball rated as like the worst rated fastball in MLB right now.
Yep. So it's definitely interesting, but I think Colorado's in one of those situations where, man, they I don't know what to do about them, but what the one thing that they've done, they've limited the home run ball pretty well, and that's tough to do in Coors, but I don't know. I mean, we'll see what happens with them going forward. So
yeah, I could see Chad Kuhl being a guy that they flip the deadline.
Yeah, they could maybe get a back into the top 30 type guy for him or something.
Yeah,
it's just
it is pretty phenomenal. Just looking at his stats right here, he has a 7.4 home run to fly ball rate this year.
Yeah,
7.4%. That's extremely low for being in Coors Field.
Yeah, that's probably something that's going to come up too. But
yeah,
but yeah,
it's been pretty interesting. But we'll see how that continues going for Chad Kuhl. But you got anything else you want to wrap up on before we close the show out?
I don't think I've got too much. Congrats to Ole Miss on winning the College World Series.
Yep.
That was entertaining this past week. There weren't that many good games until the weekend. The weekend games were really good. So the final series and the Ole Miss Arkansas series was really entertaining to watch. So I enjoyed watching some of that. And, but pretty much, that's pretty much it. We'll look at next week, I guess we'll do our breakdown because it'll be the first week of July. So look forward to that. And, All-Star game coming up. Unfortunately, we'll have a week without a lot of baseball, but for the All-Star game. But, we'll see what happens here. Coming up soon. Some big series this week going on. Mets, Astros, a couple of the better teams in baseball. That's going on, the next couple days. Braves,
Dodgers,
Phillies,
Padres over the weekend.
Dodgers and Padres play this weekend. And then you got some important series between teams that are Twins, Guardians is a big series too.
Yeah.
And then you
playing
got
5.
Yeah. And then you got a couple of important Blue Jays and Red Sox. And then you got a couple of important games between teams like, White Sox, Angels, teams that are struggling but are talented enough to where you feel like, maybe they can turn it around a little bit. So speaking of which, the Trout and Ohtani just went back to back, so that was fun. But we'll see what happens. It's going to be an interesting week, and I think we'll have a lot to talk about with our breakdowns next week.
Yeah, we'll probably do a breakdown. We'll probably mention the next phase of All-Star voting because I believe that ends next week. I want to say on the 1st.
Yeah.
The interesting thing, we'll probably look at what our ideal home run derby field would look like since none of that's been announced so far. And then once that off week, we'll probably start hitting on trade deadline because that'll come quickly approaching right after. Yep. So do have a ton of stuff that's going to be coming in the next week. or next couple weeks, with All-Star game and then heading to the trade deadline and everything. So it's going to be some packed shows, especially with the breakdown coming forward. So you guys will not want to miss it. So be sure to tune in on here and check out our YouTube channel at the Batflip Podcast. I post a version of this up there as well. Trying to help grow that a little bit more. So please go check that out, like, subscribe, whatever you want to do over there. Just check it out. Help us grow that platform somehow in some way. But thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of the Batflip Podcast, and we'll catch you guys next week.
Thanks, everybody.